as we go along.
You did great. There's always some like digital strangeness with these things. I feel like sometimes lives are just going to obey their own logic, but we're about this. So thank you so much for being here, and everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I am Shivani Ramlochan. I'm a part of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest team, and I'm really excited to welcome you all to our second official episode of Bios and Bookmarks. Now, this is an online reading series featuring Caribbean authors, and I'm really excited that our second episode features a poet, not just any poet, but one of my favorites. So this is Trinidadian-American poet Lauren K. Alleyne. She's written 2 books of poems. The first is called Difficult Truths, and her second, Honeyfish, was recently longlisted for the OCM Bocas Prize. So Lauren, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
How has this time of social isolation / quarantine / anxiety been treating you?
It's been okay. Thank you, Bocas, for getting me to shower, get dressed, and put on makeup. It's been about 4.5 weeks since I couldn't even find lipstick. I'm like, I don't even know where that is right now. But, I feel as though the stillness that this period has engendered for all of us is of course, the circumstances are so unfortunate and kind of horrific. But there's also a gift, and there's also a little grace in that. And so I'm trying to live in that space, which helps keep terror at bay as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the things that I did this morning in anticipation of our discussion was to reread Honeyfish. And I was, it's probably now the 3rd time that I've read the collection. And I was struck. It reminded me years ago when I read Difficult Truth for the first time. Mm-hmm. How your language both opened up the realness of the danger of the world, but also gave me tools to confront that danger, at least to live in it. And I feel that even more so with the second collection. So I want to personally say thank you for that before we get started.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being such a wonderful reader of the work. The work you do for poetry is amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so enough about me and my ramblings. I think everyone would love to hear from you. So if you would like to get us started with a reading, that would be great.
Absolutely. So I realized I totally used the occasion of the reading as a prompt in itself to think about what poems I'm going to read. And it turns out I write a lot about Easter and around Easter, who knew? And so I'm actually going to start with 2 poems from Difficult Fruit. And the first is Talking to the Dead, after the poet Marie Howe. The poet says it began as a letter to her dead brother, the poem telling the last details of his life until she heard his voice whispering, I know. And what she wants to say is that when we talk to the dead, we really mean to talk to anyone who will listen, who will let us tell our suffering and make it a story with a beginning, a middle, and end. And maybe it is about audience, about which attentive ear will receive our insistences. All week, in the news, a dead boy's face, his final screams replayed. All week, the solemnity and ceremony of Easter, the lilies on my makeshift chapel trumpeting their fragrant declarations, the stories told over and over, their protagonists dragged up to act out their dying until we tire of our incomprehension, the proofs we invent that cannot satisfy. Because the question is always why, and the answer is unreachable, lodged outside the realm of the living, because only the dead can say, I know. And so actually that poem was written in the wake of the Trayvon Martin events back in 2013. And so, yeah, Easter figured in that a bit as well. I also wanted to read this poem. It's really hard because I feel like Easter is such a celebratory moment and my poems can tend towards the dark. I'm wonderful. I'm really happy that you find tools for light in there. But I listened to an Easter sermon a few years ago, and I will never forget this pastor said, Jesus died for our sins, but he was killed for his politics. He died for our sins, but he was killed for his politics. And so I always feel like, Easter is also a time to think about that, it's not only resurrection, but revolution, right? Anyway, so this asks us a little bit to think about what do we do with death and how do we make it meaningful. Grief etches its silver into our days singing, and I wrote this thinking of 9/11 here in the U.S. What do the living owe the dead? What tribute? What memory? What kingdom? What time? What flesh? What fiction? What will? What mourning? What missiles? What flag? What dust? What patriotism? What purging? What tears? What wick and wax and wavering light? What vigils? What sirens? What capital? What codes? What questions? What mercy? What protest? What burning? What God? What terror? What blood? What wrath? What drafts? What suicide? What occupation? What pipelines? What desert? What hate? What brotherhood? What target? What bomb? What dignity? What sacrifices to their lingering ghosts? What stakes to scorch the guilty? What guilt? What pleading? What prisoners? What speeches? What revolution? What marches? What jury? What freedom? What is left for us to give them? What constitution? What tower do you wait in, O nation of martyrs? What anthem to salute you? What convoy? What genocide? What soldier? What search? What hidden silver? What hostage? What amber alert? What bare feet? What death? What deliverance? What promises to be kept and which to be broken? What purpose? What redemption? What history? What ritual? What bridges? What answer? What love? What love? What living do we owe our dead? So those are just two from Honeyfish. From Difficult Fruit. And moved to Honeyfish. Again, this poem, and this is wonderful because I'm getting to read poems I haven't read out loud yet in readings. So this is actually written after Miss Linda, who is a figure in our village in my area of Kupa, whose son died, and there was a very long story behind it, and it prompted this poem. And I have an epigraph from Rachel McKibbins that goes, "When grief takes hold, you monster through it." And the poem is called How to Watch Your Son Die. And I thought, well, there's Easter in that as well, if we think of Mary. Watch his skin become a coffin for his breath. Watch his bones rise like phantoms to haunt the twilight of his flesh. Beneath the bed sheet of his lids, see his eyes twitch, blind and wandering. If opened, they are the most beautiful glass. He will unremember time and laughter. His name will become a strange music in the foreign instrument of your voice. Watch him lose each human border, his tongue forsaking language, his hands growing indifferent to reach or touch, his heart sputtering its final messages to yours. Watch as he breaks from himself and becomes a body so quietly your tears thunder against his cheek. So, a lot of Honeyfish deals with the death of African American men and women here in the United States. And again, the question of afterlife that I've been thinking about it for Easter definitely is in here as well. And this poem is called Heaven, and it's for Sandra Bland, who was killed in jail driving. So it's, America. Heaven for Sandra Bland. Where does a Black girl go when her body is emptied of her? And her wild voice, where does it sing its story when the knots of history make a grave of her throat? What of her future, blue broken, unmade? Her name, say it, Sandra, unhoused. Her dreams and memories lost to their source. Where does a Black girl's love go when her heart is snapped shut like a cell door, the key out of reach as any justice? And what gift is lost when a Black girl is made a body, her light dimmed into shadow, gone? How many angels weep when a Black girl is torn into wings? How am I doing on time?
Would you like to read maybe one more? Then we might close for a bit of a discussion.
Sure. I've been, I'll end with this one, which is again a poem I don't think I've read yet out loud. But I think of, this poem is called Red Pilgrimage, and the idea of just journey and resurrection and coming out of one's own personal dark. This was written after a close friend of mine died, and you'll get the poem. Red Pilgrimage. I wanted the mountain, but found the absence of river. I wanted stone, but it was the trees that called and reached their branches out to my seeking hand. I wanted red, and the red earth parted and bade me pass. I walked until my feet became red roots, slow as the trees snarled into the riverbank. I wanted the mountain, and I saw I was at its beginning. When I touched it, it crumbled red into my hand. In my palm, a compass, a red I could hold on to. I wanted the pinnacle, but found the riverbed, dry and brimming with so much open, the ghosts of things showed themselves. Hovels and nests, half-buried sticks, bit of burning quartz, stands of snake grass long and green, poets in search of things that have no name but red. I wanted wisdom, but was given a journey. Footstep after footstep, I made my way through grief's stubborn endlessness, back into body and time. My life awaited me, glittering. I moved toward it, my red heart pulsing its red river, red air feeding my red lungs, my red breath returning, red blossoms inside me, breaking open.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was incredible. Thank you. I've been thinking a lot about the connections and bridges between your two collections, between Difficult Fruits and Honeyfish. And for those of us in the audience who have been lucky enough to read both books will definitely know that there are connections there. Was the world and the worlds of Difficult Fruits, did those feel very close to your heart and your mind as you were writing the newer poems in Honeyfish?
Yes and no. I think for a long while I was really dissatisfied, and all of those poems didn't end up in a book because I felt like I was writing like Difficult Fruit 2.0, and so the sort of downside of completing a book is, for me anyway, it's when you finally figure out what you're doing, and then it's over. And so it was a little bit hard to get out of Difficult Fruit, and then I stopped worrying about it, and I just kept writing, and it's like I'll figure out what the poems are, and I want to say that I believe every poet has their obsessions, the consciousness from which they view the world. That's what we all have, and so it makes sense to me that these books are coming from the same place, because that place is me, right? I do think that the lens shifts in Honeyfish from Difficult Fruit. I think in Difficult Fruit, I was really, the heart of those poems really comes from self and the experience of like being in a Black woman's body. It was very woman-centered, I feel like, for me anyway. It was really thinking about femininity and the vulnerability of the female body. And I think in Honeyfish, I would say it opens slightly more to think about the Black body and bodies in any space, right? Because I think what I really am trying to think about is when you bring your body, whatever that body is, and however it's scripted and signified in the world, into a space, there is an encounter. There's an encounter between your history and the history of that space. You bring things into that space that weren't there. You know, I go to Greece and I'm seeing Trinidad everywhere, and that's just because, well, Trinidad is in me, right? Oh, I come to America and I'm suddenly Black, and I'm like, what does that even mean? All right, but of course I'm Black, right? So that I think I'm thinking about the ways in which, as a tourist, as an immigrant, as a woman, as a Black person, you know, as an English speaker, a non-English speaker, there's so many encounters we keep having just by being in our bodies and taking those bodies out into the world, whether it's out your door, you know. And again, I think right now we're thinking about that even more, how vulnerable our bodies are to things we can't even see. And, you know, I'm in America, I'm like, welcome to being Black in America. Like, the history of this place is so dangerous for Black bodies. And now we're seeing biology is dangerous to the human body, you know, with this corona event. So anyway, yeah, that was a long answer.
It was great. I was here for it, 100%. To those of you just joining us, welcome again to Bios and Bookmarks. It is, if you don't know, a reading series featuring Caribbean authors all over the world, powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. And I am glad to see that some of the NGC members are here. Lisa, welcome in particular. I'm extremely glad you're tuning in. And as I ask Lauren my own questions, and I could ask Lauren questions for others, which we do have. But please feel free to leave your thoughts, your comments, and your own questions. We would love to see them. In fact, I think the next thing I'd love to talk about is something that I believe Marsha is the one who logged into the Brooklyn Caribbean Lit Fest account. I know she was very excited. For this live, she says that Lauren is our rock star, and I can believe that.
Well, she's the rock star. Pulling together an entire festival, I can't even.
Absolutely. But she mentioned something about, well, she was thanking you for your reading and saying, thanking you for resisting the act of things and history being blotted out. And I certainly agree that that's happening to a huge degree in your work. I feel your poems across both collections that remember and present Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland are some of your poems that have stuck with you the longest. How have those poems continued to live in you after the act of writing them?
I think that one of the ways you know you're a writer is if that's how you think. I think through my writing. And so I feel for me, in the midst of those, and I think they were really galvanizing movements, of course, in the States, right? Trayvon Martin, certainly, absolutely. Mike Brown, like, there are all of these sort of ways of resistance that happened. And, I had to keep thinking through them and feeling through them and finding ways to sort of wrap my mind around what was happening, what's my place and what's happening, what I think about what's happening, especially when you're bombarded with, the media and all of these different angles on us, and people become stories. And I think one of the ways that we get to participate as poets, right? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I can't go and defend people in courtroom, but I think at least through poetry, we can reclaim language. We can resist in language, especially with Trayvon Martin. I felt so annoyed is a very mild word, keeping it PG, for the way in which language was being used to flatten that child, right? And, you know, the hoodie, and the way it sort of became a stand-in for him as like a human being. And again, like the language of news and journalism and, you know, sound bites flatten and erase and sort of undimensionalize our humanity. And I think like what I hope to do in the poems is to keep at the fore the life, right? You know, and I think that's what poetry gets to do. It gets to remind us of interiority. It gets to remind us of history and memory. And it kind of calls us to engage and not simply receive, right? At least I hope that's what poems can do. And so for me, it was a way of doing that and just remembering, okay, this person's not a hashtag, right? There was a person. That some mother has lost a child, some mother has lost a daughter, a son, a husband, a wife. And so to kind of, for myself, as almost armor against that news language, to remind myself of what are we resisting for, for what cause, for what person, in what name, and what does that mean? That's what it does for me, and what I hope that the poems are able to do for others. But yeah.
I think absolutely, you know, speaking for myself, they do that important and necessary work. And I look, the way that Honeyfish opens in that opening poem is such a strong reminder to me of the value of the poet as a witness, because we have the speaker carrying herself into the day and wondering what to do with this grief and this anger and this rage. And then almost as if she's reminding herself, like, this is the poet's work. And I mean, in these times that are hard and confusing, do you feel, I don't know, this might be an unfair ask, but I'm thinking if I can answer the question myself. I probably can't, so I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you feel you're able to witness joy or happiness alongside the grief and the uncertainty? It is a question I ask myself, both as a poet and as a human. So I'd love to know what you think of it.
Yeah, I you know, my sister's probably on here laughing at me because, and my mom too, they're always sort of like, what's wrong with you? Can you write a happy poem? And I want to say, the easiest answer is I'm selfish. I hold my joy for myself. And I don't ever need to question my joy, right? I don't ever have to think through my joy. Like, I'm happy. Why is that? Like, that seems... right? Do you know what I'm saying? And so in some ways, the complications of joy are ones that you're happy to let go. Like, I probably, you know, should be thinking about this, but I'm not gonna, you know. But so I will say just in that easy way, like, why for me? But and I also think that I am interested in thinking about the radicalness and the resistance of joy, right? Like that Black life isn't simply tragedy, that Black life simply isn't, you know, darkness and labor and unfairness, because one of the magics of our Blackness is the ways that we have resisted that flattening and become, you know, created traditions, created ways of having joy. And I do want to think about that, but I also am open to the fact that just might not be my poetic work. You know, I feel as though the space that my poems live is in the elegiac space. I think I might just be a poet of the elegy and of remembrance. And I think, you know, that, you know, I'm open, muses. I'm open to changing that and to really trying to walk toward that. But I also feel as though, you know, there's so much work to be done. There's so much work. And that there are so many poets so capable of doing it. If you read Ross Day, there's a poet who's doing the work of joy, right? And he does it really, really well, you know. And so I read that work, I take it in, I hope it comes out sometime in my work, but I'm also okay with whatever it is that winds up being my part.
That's such a perfect answer. I feel like I want to record it. The whole family, when they ask where am I happy poet, so I 1,000,000% agree and can relate. And you know, I do think that that both of your books and the poems in them do make space for joy. It's not a barren, desolate waste. Like, I'm thinking of a beautiful poem in Honeyfish about the pool in Cuba. It's written for Frank Exofer, and I might probably inveigle you to read that for us. I love it so much. I mean, there's a whole thing that is cognizant of the darkness around it, but is so faithful to memories of nostalgic joy. So would you maybe consider reading it for us?
Oh, absolutely.
Yay.
Absolutely. Right now? Should I read it right now?
Yes, please.
Let me find it. And the thing that I love this poem because also of how it happened, like the epigraph is the conversation that was the impetus for the poem. I was talking to a poet, Frank X. Walker, who's an older, he'd probably kill me for that, African-American poet. And we were talking, and he said, I don't know how to swim. And I was like, what? And he said there were no pools for Black folk when I was coming up. And I thought, again, history and place, right? And I love this, what happens in this poem, because I also enjoy thinking about the immigrant space in America and how America is sort of often posits itself even in this moment as, the better, the this, the that. And there are ways in which our island and our life is just so different, and our experiences are just so different. So it just reminded me of that. So anyway, this is Variations in Blue. In Sleep's 3D theater home, a green island surrounded by the blue of ocean. Zoom to the heart, see the Cuba swimming pool filled with us, Black children shrieking our joy in a haze of sun. Our lifeguard, Rodney, his skin flawless and gleaming, black as fresh oil. His strut along the pool's edge, his swoon-worthy smile. Daddy, a beach ball-bellied Poseidon, droplets diamonding his afro. My brother hollering as he jumps into his bright blue fear, his return to air gasping and triumphant. And there, the girl I was, dumpling thick and sun-brown, stripped down to the red two-piece suit my mother had made by hand, afloat in the blue bed of water, the blue sky beaming above. When I wake up, I'm in America, where Dorothy Dandridge once emptied a pool with her pinky, and in Texas, a Black girl's body, draped in its hopeful tasseled bikini, struck earth instead of water. A policeman's blue-clad knees pinning her back, her indigo wail, a siren. I want this to be a dream, but I'm awake, and in this place where the only blue named home is a song, and we are meant to sink, to sputter, to drown.
Thank you for that. I feel like selfishly that was read just for me, but I know it was. You can see in the audience, people are just relishing the reading. They are quoting lines of the poem back, which is just really beautiful. And audience, please don't forget that you can ask questions and leave comments. I mean, they're leaving very appreciative comments, but feel free to, like someone just said, yowza. So I feel that quite nicely. Again, I want to thank NGC and the NGC Bocas Lit Fest for making this conversation possible. It's so important, I think, that we create spaces like this amidst everything that's happening outside our doors. And this is a good reminder to me that books matter in incredibly dangerous times. And it might be foolish, but to me, I think poetry matters most of all. The value of a poem to reach people in certain ways is, well, I think it's timeless. We have a question from let's see. Username is me SD. Besides Roski, and it's actually a question I was going to kind of ask myself. So besides Roski, who are you currently reading?
Oh my goodness, who am I currently reading? I just finished reading John Murillo's Contemporary American Poetry, which is a phenomenal collection. I say reading, but I haven't started yet, but I'm looking at them right now. The other two longlisters for the Bocas Prize, Vani Capaldia's book, and I think it's George Robinson. Yes. So I have those there to read. I'm rereading Kai Miller's In the Nearby Bushes and Cartographer. I'm teaching a class on advanced poetry, and it's on poetry of place. And I feel like those two collections, one of which is popping up my phone right now, but Kai's book they're both so beautiful. And so that's what else am I reading? I'm reading a lot for class because I'm doing my PhD on the side. And so, so David Scott and all sorts of things that are not at all poetic. But my current book crush is Marsha Douglas, The Marvelous Equations of the Dread, a novel in base rhythm. That is such a phenomenal novel. And every time I read it, so.
I can't stress it enough for those of you who have not read any of Marsha's work, and particularly that novel, you're missing out. That
novel will change your life.
It will. I'm actually kind of a little speechless trying to describe it. It's like nothing I've ever read. I
actually wrote a whole 25-page paper because I'm like, I need to think through what that book just did to me, and I'm writing on it for this class.
That's perfect. Talk about a great conduit. We have a question that I think is an amazing question. I'd love to hear a response to this. The user Catcha Tag asks, how do you access the muses?
Oh, I've learned that the muses are very busy people, and they don't just look around waiting to speak to me. So I appreciate it when they drop by, but I have learned to find my own muses. I tell my students all the time, you have to cannibalize the world. You have to cannibalize your life, right? Like, if I believe in a poetics of attention in which you listen, you smell, you engage in the world through your 5 amazing senses and store up all that goodness. And I find for myself questions. I love prompts. I love writing prompts, and I'm always like looking for them, making them, because I think that's how the muse is simply, to me, it's less about inspiration and more about response, right? Like, so my question becomes, how am I engaging in, like, I have a poem I was going to read for you, like, I'm really obsessed with Gretel, from Hansel and Gretel, and I don't know if my best friend Kathy's on here, but we have a whole Gretel project. We did a whole thing on that, and that fairy tale has become a lens of questioning for me. So I always ask myself what Gretel would think about any given situation, because I think we need to look at the world through young girls' eyes a little bit more than we do. So so the question of what would this character think is a prompt for a poem for me. The question so questions to me are, guess how I access the muses. I just ask a lot about, what does something mean? How would I say that? Why is this important or not important? Or everybody's talking about this. Why is nobody talking about this? That's a prompt for me. So, and then the poem I read, one of the poems I opened with, From Difficult Fruit, the one that's all questions. I just left New York before 9/11. I went to school there. I graduated, and I was about to start grad school in Iowa. So I left about 3 weeks prior to 9/11. I mean, I worked next door to the towers. I had a friend who was in the towers, and so when that happened, it was a huge event, and I wrote terrible poems about it, like nobody will ever see those. And that poem survived, and I wrote it like 10 years later, because I realized I was trying to make statements and pronouncements, and all I really had were questions, right? And so the poem became all questions, and so for me, that's just the richest place to write from.
Wow, I feel like I've learned something invaluable there. I'm going to write that down. As a way to and yes, in the comments, the name of the book, as Anton pointed out, is The Marvelous Equations of the Dread by Marcia Douglas. It was first published by People Tree Press and then was picked up by New Directions Publishing. And I think People Tree have tuned in, so...
Yay! Hey, Hannah. Hey, People Tree.
They joined a bit of a while ago, so I want to welcome them especially and thank them for being here and for doing everything that they do for Caribbean and Black British literature. I think it is around 7:30 over there, so thanks for joining us in the evening. So I will invite you to read maybe one or two poems as we begin to approach closing. But before that, I really wanted to talk about poems that were written, or maybe they were written in Greece, but certainly about Greece, and tell you how much I love them and how much, as you said, even while in Greece, in this place that you would think is so different to a Caribbean landscape, echoes of Trinidad and the Caribbean come flooding in. So did you write the Greece poems in Greece, and do they bring you any kind of comfort? Because to me, they're incredibly comforting now.
I did write them in Greece. I've actually been to Greece probably 3 times now. The first time I was there as through Kagekana, that blessed institution that has been so instrumental in my work and writing. Cornelius Edie, one of the co-founders, sponsored 8 graduates to go on this writing program. And this is one of the reasons I'm now constantly attached to my phone, because I saw the email come through and it's like, this opportunity, let us know if you want to go. And I was like, yeah. And then I was like, what do I need to do? And they're like, you did it. The first 8, they're like, we couldn't choose. So the first 8 people that responded, I was number 1. And so I got to go for a month. I studied with Carolyn Forche. I was, of course, with Cornelius, Christopher Bach, and I had a wonderful experience there. And a lot of these poems happened there. I was able to return to the writing workshops in Greece, which were an offspin of that program, and it's still going, and I recommend highly. They have 2 weekend, 1 month workshops, and so I went back there to that program twice. And so I spent a lot of time in as much as that is a few weeks altogether. And yeah, the first island, Seraphos, was really interesting, because I feel like in so many ways, in such a different landscapes, Trinidad kept re-emerging. And so, yeah.
Jen L. says, so happy to see you and hear your amazing voice.
Hi, Jenny. I think that's who that is. Should I read one of the Greek poems that Arrival?
I love that.
I hadn't planned to, but certainly I think it explains all the things we've been talking about. It's in Honeyfish, and it's called Arrival. You look at the ocean, it's fathomless blue, luminous. You look at the brown mountains rising like fresh bread, swollen with some livingness, ready to be bitten into. You are in Seraphos, and you are not in Seraphos. The blue of this water, its own, but calling from you so many other waters, Maracas, Bosphorus, the Gulf of Persia, all lapping at the shores of your memory. You have so many mountains inside you. They are your bread, the food of your soul. Seraphos is Seraphos, and every island that has come before it. Seraphos is Seraphos, and every wave of blue. How everything belongs to something else, nothing untainted by memory or the experience of what has preceded it. How it is impossible to be just one thing in this world of so many entrances, so many openings falling one into the other. A hibiscus blooms at the Benaki in Athens, and another answers at the gates of the house your father was building in Trinidad, in a small village surrounded by cane, which is disappearing, eaten by cement and new roads. Even the ruins of the untilled land will soon be gone. Your father no longer lives in that house, where the hibiscus has been replaced first by buttercups, then ginger lilies, now topiary of green flowerless shrubs. But Greece calls it, and it answers, and is here. How we wait to be called, suddenly, without warning. What has been calling you here? To what are you the answer? Seraphos is answering the call of the disappeared in you, calling the sugar and the waters of home, calling the longing for a place so simple you might remember where you are, the components of your being, the white house with the flat roof in a village so small you might forget it is where you spent your childhood. You remember yourself mostly as someone who left, who has forgotten the air gritted with the ash of cane fires, the house with no door and a leaky roof, but Seraphos asks you to remember. Seraphos demands with the dirt road that leads to your blue door, with the palm trees that brood in its heat, in the way you lift your face towards its holy sun, Seraphos calls you home.
Thank you. User Stelly Marie 29 says, lovely. Makes me think of the beach while I'm in my PJs in quarantine. And then says, loves the contradiction of familiarity and possibility.
Well, I think that's one of the joys of, again, when we think of essential workers in this coronavirus time, we need the doctors and the nurses, right? And we know the parents who want all their children to be the doctors and the nurses, but look at what is saving us. Poetry is, and the books, right? Like if you read a book, you are able to get out of your house and go somewhere else for the duration of that narrative. You come to a poetry reading and you're transported elsewhere, even as you're in your PJs, to which I shall return after this. But, so again, like I want to say to the poets and the wannabe poets out there, like, our work is essential and we should remember that when we despair, of what it means. But I think of right now, arts, so many arts, the music concerts, right, the live reading, so many things are reminding us of what it's like to be human in a time when we feel like all our usual distractions, the work, the school, the this, the that, isn't available to remind us of how to be human. The arts are here, our books are here, our music is here, and that's important. So, yay, art.
Absolutely. Chantal Lurie says, poetry is medicine for despair, and I couldn't agree more. We have, I think the last question we can take is from, and definitely a profound asker of questions, Kasha. The question is, let's see if my screen will cooperate with me, is, how does poetry serve as a filter through which you view life? How has poetry been a gift to you?
How has poetry been a gift to me? The thing that immediately pops into my head is that I think of poetry as very healing. I think that, again, we kind of referring what I was talking to earlier, the idea of grief, of loss, of confusion, of anger. Those, I think, are really toxic emotions, and without ways to handle them, to expunge them, to transform them, they can kill your soul, right? And I think that for me, the poem and the art of poetry, the crafting of poetry, the finding a way to wrap language around those feelings, to lift them out of me and put them on the page, has been the gift of poetry. And I think that also is sort of about the filter as well, because I don't want the poem to sound too self-involved, and I teach a workshop called Self-Involved because I think then it encourages me to think of myself as more than just my tiny microcosm of self, but that as nature poetry, I am a part of nature, right? Social poetry, I am a part of society, right? So at the self, I think in the poem, I'm able to expand my world, and what I think about myself and the ways that I feel connected to things. And again, that's a gift. And then I'm able to take that unique filter of experience and, personality and whatnot, and include sort of that external, and then the poem comes out, I think, as my particular take, my particular, filter, so to speak, on those larger things. And so it's a give and take. It's a symbiotic relationship. And yeah, I think Adrienne Rich wrote in an essay, I forget which one, that she said, she was a person susceptible to language. And I always say, I felt like I read that essay and it felt like a diagnosis. I am a person susceptible to language. This is, and what that means to me is that like the things I take in through language affect me. And then I'm also able to use language to express and to converse and to think. And so, yeah, hopefully that was a good answer.
Was a great answer. I think we have just enough time if you would like to close us off with one last poem. I think everyone here would love.
Absolutely. I will close with Honeyfish, which is the title poem of the second collection. And, I think it speaks a little bit that idea of connection and lingering into things. So, Honeyfish. The catch is so fresh, each bite is blue. The sea still in it, and settling on your tongue like prayer. This is what it means to eat, you think, to abandon utensils for the grace of fingers, to hold flesh against flesh, hands slick with what will become inseparable from your own thrumming body. As a child, you love fried rye, the small fish you eat whole and imagine them swimming in you, your belly full as an ocean. Now you know better, that nothing consumed lives on as before. When the bone, thin as a wish, lodges itself in the pink flesh of your mouth, refuses offerings of bread or water, becomes an ache that will not be moved, you understand. This is what it means to be a body, that what is taken in takes root in ways beyond your choosing. A single bite, and you carry the ocean in your throat.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think you've given us all a gift on this Easter day. Thank you enough. Well, everyone, that's about all the time that we have. I want to thank you all so much for being here, for Bios and Bookmarks, powered by the NGC Books Podcast. I will certainly be carrying Laura's poems with me all day and for some time to come. So thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me, Shivani. Thank you for being a wonderful host.
Thank you. Everyone, stay safe and be well. Thank you.